Hey guys, how's it going? Hope you're doing well. My name is Crown, and today I'm going to read you some very interesting stories that I hope that you're gonna love. And now, without further ado, let's go!
I've always been passionate about perfumes. It started when I was just a teenager, working my first job at a burrito place. With each paycheck, I'd save up and buy a new fragrance. Over the years, my collection grew, and now I have over 400 bottles. It's not just about owning them, I love using them, sharing them with friends, and even giving some as gifts. I'm always happy to let people sample my perfumes or give them small decants to try. My collection became a point of pride for me. I'd spend hours organizing, cataloging, and researching new scents to add. It was more than just a hobby. It was a part of who I was. I even set up a special room in my house just for my perfumes, with proper storage to keep them in the best condition. Everything was going great until my niece came into the picture. She's 17, and I thought I could trust her. I asked her to walk my dog sometimes when I was busy with work. I even showed her my perfume collection once, thinking she might appreciate it. Big mistake. One day I noticed something off about my collection. Some bottles seemed to have less in them than I remembered. At first I thought I was just being paranoid, but then I saw my niece's Instagram stories. There she was, selling samples of my perfumes to her friends. She had prices listed for each one. I scrolled through her posts, my blood boiling with each swipe. I immediately started making a list of everything she'd taken. Most of it was the trendy stuff you see on TikTok, like Bianco Latte and Escapade Gourmand. But then I realized she'd also taken an entire bottle of Baccarat Rouge. That's a $300 perfume. And she didn't stop there. She grabbed full bottles of popular perfumes like Marc Jacobs Daisy, Burberry Her Elixir, and Flower Bomb. I was furious. I printed out the entire list, along with estimated prices for everything she'd taken. Then I marched over to my sister's house, my niece's mom. I handed my sister the list, explaining that it detailed everything her daughter had stolen and sold. My sister was confused at first, so I clarified that her daughter had been stealing my perfumes and selling samples to her friends. I showed her the proof, the Instagram posts. My sister's face went pale as she realized what had happened. I told my sister that I expected to be paid back in full for everything her daughter took. My sister protested, saying it was a lot of money and that her daughter had been saving for a car. I said I didn't care and that her daughter should have considered the consequences before stealing from me. My sister tried to downplay the situation, saying her daughter was just a kid and that kids make mistakes. I agreed but emphasized that this was how she would learn from her mistakes. I declared that her daughter would have to pay me back and would never be allowed in my house again. My sister thought I was being too harsh and tried to argue against my decision. I stood my ground, reminding her that she should be thankful I wasn't involving the police. Despite my sister's attempts to argue further, I remained firm. I wasn't going to let this slide. My niece had betrayed my trust and stolen from me. It didn't matter that she was family or that she was young. A few days later, my sister called me. She informed me that they had discussed the situation and agreed to pay me back. When I asked about my niece, my sister told me she was grounded for the rest of the year. No phone, no car, nothing. She would be working to pay them back for what they were giving me. I asked if my niece had apologized. My sister said she would, in person, if I was willing to see her. After some thought, I agreed to meet with my niece the next day. The following day, my niece stood before me, her eyes red from crying. She stumbled through an apology, clearly struggling to express herself. I questioned whether she thought I wouldn't notice or if she didn't think it was wrong. She admitted it was both and promised never to do anything like this again. My niece acknowledged that she had stolen from me, broken my trust, and sold things that weren't hers to sell. Sometimes the best lessons come from our biggest mistakes. When I inherited my grandfather's old Mustang, the car was in rough shape, but I saw potential. Over the next few years, I poured my heart and soul into restoring it, learning everything I could about mechanics and bodywork. The crowning achievement was a set of custom rims I designed myself. They weren't just for show, I'd engineered them to improve the car's performance while giving it a unique look Those rims became my pride and joy, a symbol of all the work I'd put into the car. Little did I know, they'd also become the target of an entitled jerk's obsession. It was just another day when I pulled into the gas station to fuel up. I was admiring my handiwork while the tank filled when this guy walked up, eyeing my car like a kid in a candy store. The guy complimented my rims, asking where I got them. I thanked him and explained that I had designed and made them myself. He was impressed and immediately asked how much I wanted for them. I politely told him they weren't for sale and apologized. He persisted, saying everything has a price, and urged me to name it. I appreciated his interest but said they weren't for sale, explaining they were special to me. That's when things took a turn. His face hardened and his tone changed completely. He tried to persuade me by mentioning he had a lot of cash, implying I'd be stupid not to sell them to him. I stood my ground, repeating that they weren't for sale at any price, and asked him to respect that. He then accused me of thinking I was better than him, boasting about his wealth. I tried to end the conversation, asking him to leave me alone. I turned back to my car, hoping he'd take the hint. Instead, I heard him sputtering with rage behind me. He shouted that nobody says no to him and threatened that I'd regret my decision. I barely had time to react as he lunged at me, fist raised. Thankfully, years of playing sports gave me decent reflexes. I managed to dodge his wild swing and, acting on instinct, shoved him away from me. He stumbled backward and fell flat on his behind, looking shocked and furious. The commotion drew attention from other customers and the gas station staff. A couple of guys rushed over to separate us while someone else called the police. The entitled jerk was still yelling threats as they led him away, but I just focused on finishing up and getting out of there. I thought that was the end of it. Sure, it had been an unsettling experience, but I figured the guy would cool off and realize how ridiculous he'd been. 2 days later, I walked out to my driveway and felt my stomach drop. My beautiful Mustang was propped up on cinder blocks, all 4 of my custom rims gone. I immediately called the police and reported the theft, making sure to tell them about the incident at the gas station. The officer who came to take my statement seemed genuinely interested when I mentioned the gas station confrontation. He assured me they'd check the security footage and follow up on that lead. A few days passed, and I got a call from a detective. They'd identified the guy from the gas station footage and brought him in for questioning. Apparently, he'd tried to play it cool at first, claiming he'd bought the rims fair and square. But when they asked for a receipt or any proof of purchase, he started to sweat. The detective told me they'd used a classic trick during the interrogation. They pretended they had more evidence than they actually did, hinting at fingerprints and witness statements. The guy's lawyer kept trying to shut him up, but he just couldn't help himself. He started ranting about how I'd disrespected him and how he was teaching me a lesson. By the time he realized what he'd done, it was too late. He confessed to the whole thing, from the confrontation at the gas station to stealing the rims. The police arrested him on the spot. As satisfying as it was to know he'd been caught, I was even more relieved when they told me they'd recovered my rims. Turns out, the idiot hadn't even tried to sell them. He'd just been keeping them in his garage, probably planning to put them on his own car once things cooled down. When I went to pick up my rims from the police station, I ran into the detective who'd cracked the case. He seemed amused by the whole thing. The detective commented on how unusual it was to see car thieves this dumb, noting that most at least tried to sell the stolen goods. I agreed, saying I should be grateful the thief was an idiot as well as a jerk. The detective concurred but also complimented my rims, understanding why the thief was so fixated on them. I thanked him, expressing my wish that the thief had just taken no for an answer. The detective then informed me that the thief would have plenty of time to think about his actions, as the DA was pushing for maximum charges due to his prior record. That was news to me. Apparently, this wasn't the entitled jerk's first run-in with the law. He had a history of similar incidents, harassing people, making threats, and petty theft. This time, though, he'd gone too far. He pleaded guilty to avoid a trial. The judge threw the book at him, giving him several years in prison plus a hefty fine. I even got a restitution ordered to cover the damage to my car. One thing was for sure, I'd be installing a top-notch security system on my Mustang. and maybe I'd start thinking about my next custom project. After all, why stop at rims when there's a whole car to perfect? I've always been a movie buff. Ever since I was a kid, I'd spend my weekends at the local cinema, immersing myself in different worlds and stories. As I grew older, this passion only intensified. I started a film blog, joined online movie forums, and even considered studying film in college. But life had other plans, and I ended up pursuing a more practical career in accounting. Still, my love for cinema never waned. I made it a point to watch at least one new movie every week, often dragging my best friend along. He wasn't as passionate about films as I was, but he enjoyed our outings and my excited ramblings about plot twists and cinematography. So when this incident happened, it hit me particularly hard. It was about 3 years ago, and a highly anticipated sci-fi thriller had just been released. I was beyond excited to see it, having followed its production for months. In my enthusiasm, I booked tickets for a Wednesday showing. My friend, bless his heart, got confused and booked tickets for Saturday. We left it off when we realized the mix-up. I suggested we watch it twice, once on Wednesday and again on Saturday. If we didn't like it, we could always give the Saturday tickets to someone else. Wednesday came and the movie blew us away. The plot twists, the special effects, the performances, everything was top-notch. We left the theater buzzing with excitement, dissecting every scene. By the time we reached home, we had already decided to watch it again on Saturday. Saturday evening rolled around. We met up for a quick drink before heading to the cinema. The theater wasn't very crowded, just a few families across the aisle and 3 people sitting in the row right in front of us. As the trailers began, the trio in front started chatting loudly. I didn't mind too much. Lots of people discuss upcoming movies during trailers. But when the film started and they kept talking, I started to get annoyed. Then came the selfies, with flash. In a dark theater, I leaned forward and politely asked them to keep it down and stop taking photos. One of them turned around and rudely told me they were enjoying the movie their way and that I shouldn't tell them how to watch a film. I exchanged a look with my friend. We both shrugged and tried to focus on the movie. But it was impossible with their constant chatter and the glow of their phones as they recorded TikToks. After about 20 minutes of this, I'd had enough. I noticed the families across the aisle looking annoyed too. That's when an idea struck me. I turned to my friend and, making sure the group in front could hear, I mentioned how a certain character dies later in the movie. My friend caught on immediately and added information about a big betrayal at the end. The reaction was immediate. One of them turned around, clearly shocked, and asked if we were really spoiling the movie for them. I smiled innocently and repeated their earlier words, saying we were just enjoying the film our way, and they shouldn't tell us how to watch our movie. They didn't like that. They started throwing popcorn and empty cups around, causing even more disruption. But their plan backfired spectacularly. One of the parents across the aisle had apparently had enough. They quietly slipped out and returned with a staff member. Before the troublemakers knew what was happening, they were being escorted out of the theater. The staff member recognized us from our Wednesday visit and offered us a refund. We declined but accepted his offer of a free beer instead. And every time I go to the cinema now, I silently thank those 3 for making that particular movie experience unforgettable, though probably not in the way they intended. I remember it like it was yesterday. It was the fall of '65 and I was in my second year at Worcester Polytechnic Institute. Back then it was an all-male college and we took pride in our laid-back atmosphere. We were engineers, not fancy-pants business types. Our dorm had its own dining hall and it was always a casual affair. We'd roll in after classes, grab some grub, and swap stories about our latest projects. It was comfortable, you know. But then this new administrator showed up, fresh from some Ivy League school, I guess. He took one look at our dining hall and decided it wasn't classy enough. Next thing we knew, there was a notice posted everywhere about a new jacket and tie required dress code for dinner. Can you believe it? We were furious. I mean, we're talking about a bunch of guys who considered it dressing up if they changed their t-shirt. During the comment period, we all voiced our objections. I remember writing a long letter explaining how impractical it was for students who spent their days in labs and workshops. But this administrator, let's call him Mr. Fancy Pants, he just ignored us all. The night before the new policy was set to start, a bunch of us were sitting around the common room, trying to figure out what to do. I expressed my frustration, saying we couldn't let them get away with this ridiculous policy. My roommate suggested we all just refuse to follow it. Another friend chimed in, questioning whether they could really stop serving the entire student body. We debated for hours. Some guys wanted to stage a sit-in, others suggested a full-on boycott. But then, around midnight, this quiet guy from down the hall spoke up. The quiet guy proposed an idea that left us confused at first. He suggested we follow the dress code, but only the dress code. When it finally hit us, we couldn't stop laughing. It was genius. We spent the rest of the night spreading the word, making sure every guy in the dorm was in on the plan. The next day, dinner time rolled around. I put on my jacket and tie, feeling a bit silly standing there in my room. But I knew what was coming. We all filed downstairs, trying to keep straight faces. As we entered the dining hall, the staff's eyes nearly popped out of their heads. There we were, every single one of us, wearing jackets and ties, and absolutely nothing else. Bare chests, bare legs, bare everything except for those stupid jackets and ties. The head of the kitchen staff, this older lady we all loved, she just stood there with her mouth open. She stumbled over her words, clearly shocked by what she was seeing. Mr. Fancy Pants was there too, his face turning redder by the second. He sputtered, trying to express how unacceptable this was, but struggling to form coherent sentences. I calmly pointed out that we were following the dress code, wearing jackets and ties just as required. My roommate backed me up, asking if there was a problem since we were all properly attired according to the new policy. Mr. Fancy Pants sputtered and fumed, but he couldn't argue with us. We had followed his precious dress code to the letter. The kitchen staff were trying so hard not to laugh. I swear I saw the head lady give us a wink as she started serving food. We all sat down to eat, acting like everything was perfectly normal. The clink of forks on plates mixed with barely suppressed giggles. Mr. Fancy Pants stormed out, probably to call the dean or something. About halfway through the meal, the dean himself showed up. He took one look around the room, shook his head, and actually started laughing. He conceded that we had made our point and officially rescinded the dress code. He then jokingly asked us to please put some pants on. From that day on, whenever anyone suggested changing things at WPI, they'd always pause and ask, "But what if they show up in just jackets and ties?" It became a legend on campus. And hey, at least we didn't have to buy any new clothes for that one dinner. And now we have reached the end of today's stories. Thank you for watching, and see you next time.